Hey, this is Gluten-Free Beer Brian, and today I have Jonathan Neff of Neff Brewing. Here's one of their cans. Let's see.
Yeah, that's fun. Our latest collab.
Yeah, love this beer. I'll try this one tonight, and I've got one more I'm going to try. I'm going to keep that a surprise for the moment. But why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us about Neff Brewing?
Sure. Yeah, well, so I'm Jonathan Neff. I'm the co-founder, head brewer, janitor, jack of all trades at Neff Brewing in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And yeah, so we are Oklahoma's only dedicated gluten-free brewery. We use malts from Grouse Malt House and Eckert Malt House. So everything's made naturally gluten-free, no enzymes, none of that gluten-reduced BS. It's real gluten-free beer. And the reason we started doing that was because I was diagnosed with celiac disease in 2012. And I was told I could never drink beer again, which was a real bummer. And that was right when the craft beer scene was actually just it was a burgeoning craft beer scene, brand new thing to Oklahoma back then, about 2011, 2012. All my friends were into it, and I felt really excluded from it. I really wanted to try craft beer and be a part of it. So I started home brewing. And then after a few years of recipe development and home brewing, I decided that it was a lot more fun than my day job, and I wanted to kind of go full tilt and see if we could make a brewery with it. And that was, I guess, in 2017, we kind of went full tilt towards trying to get the brewery open, and finally opened up December of 2018. And a few years later, here we are. We survived the pandemic so far, so that's really good for us.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed. It's still around, especially here in Oklahoma, because we're in Oklahoma. But we've done well enough through that, and we're still alive and kicking and ready to see what we've got for 2022.
Oh, that's awesome. Do you use Eckert and Grouse?
Mm-hmm.
So all rice malt, because rice malt comes from Eckert. Grouse does millet, corn, buckwheat,
and quinoa. Yeah,
and quinoa.
Mm-hmm. So all of our beers have some combination thereof. I think one thing that we do a little bit differently than a lot of other breweries is I don't use any one of those malts as a base malt. I frequently will take, depending on what beer style we're going for, what characteristics in the beer we want, we will use some combination thereof of a pale millet, pale rice, a pale buckwheat, or maybe I throw in some Munich malt. But we find that you can get kind of a more well-rounded flavor by balancing those. Mm-hmm. It can get a little hairy. You don't want to get too many malts in the beer. It gets a little muddled on the flavor, but yeah, that's what we use.
Do you use any adjuncts like oats or sugars, honey?
We don't use too much honey. We put honey in our Saison that we don't actually can. It's just a taproom only beer. One of my favorites, and we actually use that to beer batter all of our food in our kitchen. That's also dedicated gluten-free at the taproom. But we use Belgian candy sugars pretty frequently. I really like the consistency of the color of those. So on certain beers where I want a specific color, I generally will rely on those Belgian candy sugars, which is just roasted beet sugar.
Right.
Because you can rely on that color being the same every single time.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little more difficult with the gluten-free malts to get exactly the same color. There's going to be similar, but we brewers can be pretty nitpicky and want to get it exactly the same every time. So I like using those in a few beers. And we use oats in one beer. We get those from they're just down the street from where we get them. We get them from Grouse.
Okay.
And we get the certified gluten-free oats from Grouse. And I want to say they source those from a dedicated farmer field that does only oats there, so there's no cross-contamination there.
Yeah, I think that would be the Grouse, way of things.
Yeah, they're real good about that. And so no gluten to begin with, so we don't have to worry about any gluten in the end product. And we're really strict about it on site. I don't even let my employees who aren't gluten-free eat a sandwich on site. They have to go outside to eat their gluten meals.
And brush your teeth before you come inside.
Yeah. No one's allowed to bring anything that has gluten in it into the building.
Right.
So that, helps maintain, any issues with cross-contamination or anything like that.
That's what I love. And it makes sense, from a celiac point of view. if you're going to go so far as to be, a dedicated gluten-free brewery, you're going to go all the way.
We definitely, we do that, especially, at our kitchen as well. We've had a lot of people want to come in and sell their gluten-free products. And we're like, okay, but you have to make them here and we have to watch you make them. We had some issues there for a while because being in a downtown brewery, we don't just attract the gluten-free crowd, we attract all kinds of people down to the brewery. There's frequently like people wanting to hold a birthday party at a brewery and they don't even say anything and just try and walk in with a cake, and we have to like stop them at the door and be like, nope. We brought in a gluten-free baker. She would come in, this was pre-pandemic, she was coming in about once a week and baking stuff for us, and she wanted to do all that at her own kitchen. We were just like, no, you're going to come in and cook using our kitchen, our utensils, stuff we can guarantee is gluten-free.
Right.
And we're real strict about it. I'm highly sensitive as a celiac, and so
and it makes sense.
If it's gonna hurt me, it's gonna hurt anyone else, so I don't want that to happen.
Right. Well, and then especially like as a business, I know there's like all kinds of legal things. Like here in Michigan, a brewery cannot serve someone else's beer.
Yeah, same.
Yeah. So if you have a brew pub, you can't serve your friend's brew pub's beer in your brew. I know that changes state by state, because I think Oregon they can, because Groundbreaker and Beerly and like they all have each other on tap or have their cans in their tasting room and all of that, and it's like, yeah, we can't do that here.
We're pushing for that change in Oklahoma right now. They've got a bill they're going to be voting on soon. I hope it passes, because we really want to get our beer, at least in cans, in all the other breweries. Because
oh yeah, that would be great.
I mean, they all wanted, I know we just, that, can you were just picking up earlier was a collab we did with Iron Monk Brewing out of Stillwater, Oklahoma. And they just approached us saying like, we really want something gluten-free on tap, but we want to make sure it's like good for people and not going to make people sick. And so they didn't want to just brew it on their system. So I said, well, let's do this collab brew. We'll keep half of it. You guys keep half. And it's good and it's dedicated gluten-free. And they even, bought like new lines to, they did keg some. So we got some new draft lines for them and stuff. Cross-contamination. We'd like to do that for all the other breweries because, love being here for the celiac community, but I'm sure it's got to get a little boring going to the same brewery every time, even if it's just, the same atmosphere.
Right. Or, even it's like your friends don't want to go to the same place every time. And
Right.
They want to go to the other place, and it'd be fun to go there and it'd be like, oh, hey, I can go there tonight. They've got something from Neff, so I'm going to go there and
right.
check it out. At least I know I can get something I can drink. That's not cider.
Yeah.
So I'm going to show you what my surprise beer of yours. There we go. The Raspberry Pride.
All right.
So
the
reason to me this is a special beer is one of my good friends from high school actually organizes Ferndale Pride, which Ferndale's a local city here in Michigan. Okay. And Pride is an acceptance of other people having different loves, and all of that is just something that's always been important to me. And you're one of the few that has really, like dove in and put out a Pride beer. And it's a raspberry fruited kettle sour, which I love sours.
Awesome. Yeah, we really like that beer. We're proud of what it's become, and it's really cool that we're actually, the Tulsa Equality Center is on the same block as us. We're on opposite corners of the block, but our brewery is actually on the corner of 4th and Pride Street. So we wanted to make sure that was tied into part of our identity as a brewery.
Here we go. Just top it off. Little glam shot for you.
Yeah.
So cheers.
Yeah, cheers.
Okay. Oh, nice. It's like the raspberry just kind of grows in a way. It's not like punch you in the face right away with raspberry. It's kind of like soft, then the sour, and that's like this growing sort of raspberry thing.
Yeah, we wanted it to not well, for lack of a better words, we just wanted to make it approachable beer because we knew a lot of celiacs who haven't had sours before, they're not, going to want something that really puckers your mouth.
Right.
And so you make it kind of an approachable, more tart beer. And I also went and did some experimentation and tried to figure out what pH is actually, what level of acidity is a raspberry actually at? Because when you eat a raspberry, it's sweet, but it's also tart. And getting that right balance. So we kind of play with the pH of the beer to adjust that acidity level so that it really feels more like, eating raspberries with a nice, beer malt backbone.
Right. And it does. It's not like, overwhelmingly sour or anything like that. But it definitely tastes like raspberries. Like when I used to pick raspberries off the bush behind my parents' house and just eat them straight. It's very much how it's coming across to me.
Yeah, that was our, what was it, in 2020, we took a gold medal for that in the Oklahoma Craft Beer Awards for
nice.
Fruited beers. So that was, competing against all other fruited beers, whether they had gluten or not. So we were really excited to take a gold with that.
Now, when you enter competitions, do you usually enter like the gluten-free or the alt grain category, or do you just throw this one up in the IPA?
Right, that's what we generally do. In this last year, in 2021, we wanted to try out submitting to the gluten-free category. We submitted to the World Beer Cup, and then I got a letter from FedEx saying that our beer never arrived there. And I got a call from the guy who organized it. He was like, yeah, so I got your boxes, but they arrived empty. And I was just like, what? So someone, along the lines took all of our beer out, so we don't get to submit to any world beer competitions this year.
My
It sucks, but generally that was the one where we submitted all to gluten-free category. In the past and moving forward, we're going to stick with just submitting to regular categories because, I wish there were enough of us in the gluten-free beer world that we could separate some categories out, but when you submit and you're just saying this is gluten-free beer, the judges will have an imperial lager, an IPA, and a Belgian all next to each other.
Yeah, and a rye IPA because that's now in the alt grain category.
Right. And how do you compare those beers? You can't. And so it's just, to me, it's like, okay, well, you should just submit these to the other categories. Or the the new non-alcoholic categories are that's growing a lot is getting lumped in with these alternative grain or gluten.
Yeah, I saw that.
And it would just make more sense, like, just if it's good and you want to win a competition, just submit it against the other beers, and then you've got the clout to say, well, this beer is gluten-free and tastes just as good as the gluten-full beers, or this beer is non-alcoholic and tastes just as good as these other beers. And that to me says a lot more. It's harder, but I think more rewarding in the end. I mean, you would think at the very least at that point they'd be able to put in a handful of subcategories, like light, dark, hoppy, sour. Like, just give them something to kind of lump them in a little bit,
or come up with the day of, depending on what came in. Try to put them with like things. Or I was even thinking that you would just enter it, say your stout with the stouts, but then they would take all of the gluten-free entries, like so the stout would be compared with all the other stouts and scored like a barley stout. And then you just sort of pick out all of the gluten-free ones and which gluten-free beer got the highest score.
Right.
And then that's the best gluten-free beer. So like you're still competing against other beers in your, in that style category, but you're also competing against the other gluten-free beers. In a way.
I thought of it that way, but I think that's a great idea. I am going to send to all the different big beer competitions, because it seems like it would be a little bit easier for them to just judge the beer, give it a score, and then say, well, this one got this, and then you look at all the gluten-free beers that were stouts or whatever, and you say, okay, this one wins.
Right.
But the way it is now, I just think it's kind of an afterthought, and they're trying to be inclusive, but they're just not doing a very good job at it, and it just needs to be really thought out.
Well, the alt grain category is the worst because it's literally, you can have a barley beer that uses 30% corn or something, and they'll call it alt grain. So you're still competing against barley-based beers. And
yeah, and then now that we've got, it's because it's, I don't want to say like it's trending or anything, but it's just gluten-free beer, with the hard work that, others who've laid down the foundation, like, props to Groundbreaker, Ghostfish, Holiday, they've done great work to lay the groundwork for everyone of making good beers, that people are realizing gluten-free beer can be good. So these bigger breweries are saying, well, hey, like, let's go ahead and make one too. And, at that point, I'm sure it's not dedicated gluten-free, all right, but they're submitting to these categories. And when you're a gigantic brewery that produces, 50,000 barrels a year, and you've got all that crazy, equipment and centrifuges and, things that just us gluten-free brewers, there's no way we can afford, sometimes you're going to win just because of that. And
or maybe just because of their name.
Just because of their name. I mean, I think there's, definitely.
And they only do like one.
Yeah.
They do like an IPA or something. And it's like, okay, so you nailed that on having the best hop profile out of all the entries. What is your brewing motto?
Okay. I guess for me, I've never been one who's really into, what's the best way to put it, like just fanciful beers. Like, I follow a lot of different breweries all over the world, and there are some out there that like put out really neat stuff, but I'm not sure it would like appeal to my palate. Like some of those, like, Omnipolo puts out like those quintuple fruited imperial gozas and things like that. We've got a brewery here in town that regularly releases imperial stouts that are like 16, 17, 18% alcohol.
God.
And it's just, and they pour like a syrup, and it's just like, okay, there's a market for that. People are buying that and they like it, but I'm not sure that's anything I would, even if I could, that I would want to drink. For me, it's all about something being approachable, something that's brewed for everyone, something that anyone can step up to and enjoy, whether or not you are a craft beer drinker or someone who just, you enjoy your seltzers if you're gluten-free, or if you're just Joe Schmo walking down the street with your Michelob Ultra and you want to walk in and try a craft beer for the first time, that we would have something that you wouldn't turn your nose up at. And, just to be as inclusive as we can be. That's why our flagship beers are, varied styles from, an oatmeal stouts to a kettle sour, a lager, very approachable IPA, really easy drinking Belgian. And like our stout is one specifically, like people always say, it's like, no, this is a stout like I could see myself drinking, a 4-pack of on a hot day in the middle of the summer. Like it's good, it's refreshing, it's not heavy, but still has those nice roasty flavors. And it's really important to me to brew beer that really anyone who's of legal drinking age can enjoy. And so that's kind of how I go about all of my recipes. I don't want to make something that's 1,000 IBUs and is so bitter you got to brush your teeth afterwards, or one of those imperial stouts that's a borderline whiskey, things like that. And it's much more my style to say, okay, like, let's brew, keep it within that range of, generally less than 7%, more than 4% alcohol. It's approachable. You can sit down and drink a few of them. There's no one flavor that's going to dominate the beer. It's something that, you can taste all of it. That's important to me. And with my background being in the hard sciences, so my college degree was in chemistry, went on and got an engineering graduate degree, and I was actually going to get a second graduate degree when I dropped out of my PhD program to do a brewery instead, which is way more fun. But in that, I like to use my scientific background to really work on the nuances of like the water chemistry and get into, when I'm choosing hops, which ones to use together, although, man, hop chemistry is intense.
Oh God, that's insane.
Way above my head a lot of the time. I do my best, to kind of delve into that and, play with it to see what I can do to create really fun beers that really anyone can enjoy.
This is going to be a really hard one, and it's very, very important.
Okay.
Do these stickers glow in the dark? Because that's glow in the dark yellow.
It does look like that. They don't, but I have to do that now. We have gotten some really cool like holographic stickers and stuff in the past that are a lot of fun, but glow in the dark stickers is not anything I had thought of, but that's actually a great idea. And
it would totally go with the spaceship theme.
Yeah,
which I love the hop cone as the flames coming out the back of the rocket ship. And like that should fucking glow in the dark. That would take me back to 1985.
We're gonna get some glow in the dark stickers now because that's awesome.
And I really love that you guys have magnets.
Yeah.
Because I really don't want to just, plaster my kitchen beer fridge with stickers.
Mm-hmm. And we actually started making magnets because we had gone to, I can't remember where it was. It might have been in Texas. We went to a festival and they were like, made us like put all of our stickers back in the car, and they're like, you can't bring those in this building, no stickers, because they were afraid like during the festival, people were just going to sticker everything up.
Oh, okay.
Like, magnets. And we were like, oh, okay. So then we started ordering magnets and realized people really like magnets. And we were just like, well, all right, they're like not much more expensive than stickers and they're really cool. So why not?
Yeah, you can slap on the back of your car or whatever, take it off later. No commitment.
Yeah, exactly. It's the, being able to, put them on your fridge or your car or wherever and not have to worry about it. You can peel it off later.
So what is the gluten-free community like, and have you traveled enough to get a sense of what gluten-free is like in other states versus where you are?
Yeah. Actually, I lived in New York for about 6 months. When I was going to grad school there, I also did a few stints in Seattle at Ghostfish Brewing before we ever opened up.
Okay.
They were really kind and let me volunteer some time up there a few weeks at a time and kind of got to know the culture up there in Seattle. I've got some family out in the Portland area as well, so I visited there a lot. And I think the biggest difference you find between Tulsa, Oklahoma and those other cities would be just understanding and knowledge of what celiac disease is versus a gluten intolerance versus someone who just wants to eat gluten-free because, in Oklahoma, they don't necessarily in most places take it real seriously unless, you talk to them about that.
Right.
Oklahoma's, famous for its really, nice and accommodating people. So they'll sit there and listen to you and go talk to the chef and stuff. But there's just a lot less general knowledge about it. And you are less likely to find places with gluten-free food on the menu. I feel like when I was in those bigger cities like, Portland and Seattle, and it's been several years now, but back when I was visiting some friends over in Huntington Beach in California, it seemed like just everywhere had at least a handful of options and everyone knew what a gluten allergy was. Everyone knew what celiac disease was, and it just wasn't really an issue. And there, are times here in Oklahoma where, something will be labeled gluten-free and you say, well, does that mean, you have a dedicated fryer for it? And they're like, oh no, it's fried the same stuff. And you're like, okay, well, just so you know, that's not gluten-free.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh crap. Okay, we'll change that on the menu. We're sorry.
Well, at least they change it.
No, they listen and they'll do this. It takes some time. People are accommodating in most places, but it's just not. It's kind of like the craft beer scene where Oklahoma is just about 10 years behind the coasts. And,
okay.
The South Central U.S. is, in most things culturally, is going to be a little bit behind places that have bigger cities. But you still find places like we have several restaurants in town that just everything on the menu is gluten-free. It's
that's
not
awesome.
Advertised that way, just a little note at the bottom, everything gluten-free. And we've done some gluten-free beer pairing dinners around in Tulsa and Oklahoma City. So there are plenty of spots. It's just not quite as common. You got to seek it out a little bit. And as such, the community is pretty tight knit. I've gotten to know most people in the Tulsa area anyway, just because those who have celiac disease frequent the brewery, and sooner or later I run into them in their fourth or fifth time in the tap room and strike up a conversation. And you know, that's always fun, sharing stories and getting to know people. A few of our regulars have become, you know, good friends of mine.
Oh, that's awesome.
But yeah, so really it's fewer options of places to go, but people are really accommodating. I've been to plenty of restaurants where I tell them what's going on, and then they're like, well, we don't have that, but you know, we could do this for you. We can make this for you. They'll make something off menu for me.
Right.
And so that's always been nice. You know, being in Oklahoma, I'm a big fan of Mexican food. And generally speaking, that's going to be gluten-free. And we've got a real strong culture of Mexican food in Oklahoma. And so that's always been easy. Like if I need food and I want to go out and I don't know where to go, easy enough to just go get some good Mexican food.
Yeah, go to the Mexican restaurant. Chances are you'll be okay.
Yeah. I mean, we have a lot of, you know, just hole in the wall taco shops, you know, and that's what we crank out. And so you don't have to worry about them having like flour tortillas for burritos and things, because all they're doing are just cranking out tacos on corn tortillas.
Yeah.
And you know, you can see the big bag right there. There's a giant ass bag of corn tortillas. It says gluten-free on it. So all right, I'm good.
All right. So now I'm going to have Cowboys and Aliens, which is a collaboration IPA that you did with whom?
That was with Iron Monk Brewing out of Stillwater, Oklahoma. And that was a really fun beer. An IPA inspired by an English IPA, but we used more New Age hops in it. It's really fun. Their theme is kind of the Old West and Western and old styles. And our theme is, you know, space age, New Age. And so we kind of blended that idea together. So we took an English IPA malt base and hopped it with some New Age hops, added in some cryo hops and stuff. And it's tasty. I like it.
Oh, it is.
Got a nice hop aroma and hop flavor. But after the hops die down, you get the nice malty backbone that I really like.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I know you're not supposed to describe an IPA as having balance between hops and malt, but it does. And you've got Citra and Eldorado, which are two of my favorite fucking hops to use.
I agree. Those are some of my favorites as well.
Oh God, I love that. It's just, this is like an IPA I could drink all day long at the beach.
Really
and at 6.8%, that might not be a good idea. But
yeah, it's a bit, but it's a good one. I like. I'm just a real fan of how like the beer just kind of evolves on the palate, where you just starts out with those hops and that aroma of the hops, and then after you've swallowed the beer, the palate finishes just with like a little bit of hop bitterness, but not so much, because it's balanced with that really nice malty sweetness. This was actually the first beer we ever used Red Wing millet in from Grouse Brewing. That was
okay.
And it gives it that nice, you know, red color it's got there. And I really like that malt. It's got that nice kind of toasty, caramely note.
It does.
Kind of finishes off on, it's a little on the sweeter side, but we balance it out with some of the IBUs, so hopefully, you know, it drinks well enough.
Getting the lighting to really work on camera. There we go.
That works well
for the viewers. But yeah, I do like using Red Wing. I haven't used it in a while. I've been going like down my own road with malts.
It's fun playing with new stuff. I'm excited. We're getting in. I hope it arrives tomorrow or Friday. We've got a big order of malt coming in from Grouse, and they threw on some samples of some new stuff they've been working on. And we've got our little 1-barrel pilot system we try out new recipes on. So I'm excited.
Right.
Experimentation going.
Can you describe your brewing process, like your system a little?
We try our best to keep it as simple as possible on a production scale, because it's hard to make those those changes sometimes, you know, to do those, you know, really finite step mashes or adding in one enzyme and then at one temperature and doing all these other things. We try and keep it simple, but for the most part, what we do different is just an extended mash. Ours take about 2 hours, and we use enzymes, and we play a lot with the water chemistry and pH and a few other things to kind of adjust the activity of the enzymes, because the gluten-free brewing, you know, I should say in regular brewing, most of the time, the way you affect like your gravity of the beer, if you want it to be really sweet finishing beer or really dry finishing beer with low gravities, you adjust the temperature on how you're mashing. That'll affect those enzymes that are naturally present, what sugar profiles they're spitting out. But since we have to add in our enzymes, you don't have nearly as much control over that other than by which enzymes you choose to use. But so we play a little bit more with, you know, which malts we're using and, you know, what parts per million of one salt or another are we using? Are we buffering the water a lot to resist the pH changes, to maximize one enzyme over another, just kind of depending on what style of beer we're putting out there. So, you know, for a big heavy stout, something that we want a nice, you know, high finishing gravity there to leave it, you know, a bit of sweetness, or, you know, an imperial stout, something like that. That mashing regime is going to be entirely different than when we're doing a, you know, a dry lager or something like that.
Right.
So enzymes, the amounts, all that is adjusted. But we're doing all that on our 10 barrels, but we have 20 barrel tanks for the most part. We got 1 or 2 10 barrel tanks sitting around. And mostly what we do on that one is just crank out our flagships and some tap room favorites that we have that we go through a lot of. And then there's a seasonality to it, but we do a lot of brewing on our 1 barrel system as well, to try out new recipes, to try out new techniques, try, you know, new ingredients. For instance, you know, lately we're working on some new hazy IPA and new kettle sour recipes. And so we've been playing around a lot on the pilot system with that. Excited to have some new stuff come out later this year, if all goes well on those. And yeah, so like that Raspberry Pride you just had, that started out on our pilot system as a 1 barrel batch we did to just have a special event with the Equality Center on Pride weekend in Tulsa when they had the Pride Parade and stuff. And it, like, we'd never sold the beer as quickly as we did that one, and realized that, okay, 1, we need to keep the sour on, and 2, it needs to be this sour. So we did another batch and it was gone, and another single day. You're like, okay, this is too much work brewing 1 barrel at a time. Let's do 10 barrels. And then sure enough, it's become our #1 seller. That is our,
oh, wow.
Here's the Raspberry Pride. It's our #1 seller in Oklahoma, Kansas, and Texas. Those are the 3 markets we're in right now. And it outsells.
That's really interesting, because I kind of would have thought, especially in Texas, that, you know, a Pride beer, a lot of people would turn their nose up at it just for that. And kind of, you know, that South would have been, well, if it's not an American light lager, it ain't beer. And for that to be your best seller,
yeah, in all markets on those. And
that's awesome.
I really think, I mean, part of it is, you know, it's a good beer, people like it, but also it's bringing in another group that has been, you know, historically underrepresented in the brewing industry. I think it's important to be able to, like, look at a product, look at a label, and see, like, hey, this is, like, you know, this is made for, you know, for us. This is finally representing us in market. And, you know, we wanted to do that. And so it does well. I think it does really well in the Austin market, does well across Oklahoma. Also, surprisingly, like, the top styles in, you know, everyone loves IPAs, and IPAs are always going to sell. But aside from that, sours are like a big style in Oklahoma. And I was just never would have thought of that. You know, when I finally started drinking craft beer, like, sours were a thing I kind of tended to turn my nose up at. I had to teach myself how to drink a sour and how to enjoy it. You know, as a kid, I never liked sour candies or things like that, but I've really grown to enjoy a raspberry sour. We've done a few others. We're working on one right now that I think is going to go pretty well. It's made with It's a black cherry sour. It's probably going to go into cans as a one-off to see how well it does here later this year, but we're calling it, Black Cherry Pride. And just kind of keep our kettle sour series as our Pride series and see how that goes.
So with the Raspberry Pride, and I want to segue this into the Raspberry More Stout, but how are you adding the raspberry?
We use an aseptic fruit puree, and in fact, I think our Raspberry Pride was far and beyond better a year ago than it is today, because our puree supplier had some issues and they had to switch like raspberry farms or something like that for a few months. And when we ordered a full pallet of it, we got that one. And what arrived was a little less raspberry puree and more like raspberry juice or something like that. It's just a little thinner puree. Still tastes great, but it doesn't quite give the same color, or it's like it's kind of like an intangible characteristic, but like a jamminess to the beer it really had before, and it's a little more muted now. But we're just about out of that and gonna get a pallet of the new stuff that it supposedly switched back to their old raspberry farmer. So hopefully that'll work out for us. But yeah, so generally when we're fruity beers, that's what we're doing. And the same thing we did with the Raspberry More Imperial Stout, though quite a bit less raspberry added to that one. But we did just added some raspberry puree along with the vanilla beans and coffee we used in that one.
Yeah, I really liked that one. I didn't read the label before I cracked it and poured it. I was just like, oh, Raspberry More. I like that name. And I'm thinking this is going to be like a raspberry sort of sour sort of beer. And it's pours like black. I'm like, what? It's going to be a stout. Fuck yeah. I mean, that's what I get for not reading the label, but that's something I do that on purpose, because like I just want to taste the beer without preconceptions. I was really impressed how it tasted kind of like, I guess, like chocolate covered raspberries would taste, where it's like those flavors came through distinct, even though they're like, like on your palate, like they're very far apart, fruit and chocolate, but they pair so well. And to pull that off in a beer, I was like, that's pretty damn cool.
Yeah, that was a fun one. We actually, so that beer evolved from a pilot batch we did as a collab with a local coffee shop in Tulsa. It's like a coffee, and they had this blend of coffee beans that was really berry forward in the flavor. It had some like raspberry and blueberry notes coming out of it if you just drank it black and do the special coffee brewing that I know very little to nothing about. But I just fell in love with that coffee. Thought, this is great. I want to do a beer with this. So we did one that was just with the coffee, and a friend of mine who used to work over at this coffee shop had a lot of fun making punny names. So we came up with Brewberry More, and we got a kick out of that. And then we decided, well, let's one up this a bit more and play on that berry flavor we're getting out of this coffee, and let's actually add some berries into it. And then we added in a little bit of extra vanilla, just kind of blends the coffee and fruit flavors together a little bit.
Yeah,
it's one of my favorites for sure. Imperial stouts. For me anyway, I'm a one and done on one of those beers. I think it's 12 point something percent.
With the vanilla, are you using vanilla extract, or are you getting like, imported Madagascar vanilla beans? Or
yeah, we get the whole vanilla beans and chop them up real fine. And depending on the beer, we'll add them different ways. Sometimes you just throw it in the tank and let it sit there for a few weeks. Other times, depending on the level of vanilla flavor you want, we'll just recirculate the beer over the beans and like a little strainer, so the beer's just flowing over the beans, getting the nice flavor, but not sitting in there too long.
And would that be post fermentation when you're doing the recirculation?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll generally in a beer like that, and if I remember right, we did oak in that beer as well. And what we did with the Raspberry More, if I'm remembering right, we put the vanilla beans, suspended them in the tank, but then we kind of jimmy rigged this set up so that we could have these oak spirals that were going to kind of mimic barrel aging flavor inside a stainless steel tube. And then so we were flowing the beer and it was constantly flowing over that oak with the beans in there, or the coffee beans, vanilla beans, and raspberry all in the tank. And we let that recirculate for like 3 days, I think, at a low speed, which is kind of nerve-wracking because if someone walks by and accidentally kicks the pump or something like that, you lose your whole batch of beer.
Oh God.
It's not just us production people back there. Sometimes, you know, like cooks will walk back through the production area to go use the restroom or something. So we put stanchions up around it, tried to block it off with pallets, everything we could. But yeah, that was fun. It was a fun brew.
On a homebrew scale, I'm just sitting there thinking like, oh my God, the oxygenation. I'm guessing like on, 10-barrel system, you've solved that problem.
Yeah, I mean, we've got, CO2 drops all over the place. You flush your whole system with CO2 for, half an hour. In theory, there's no chance of oxidation as long as everything's, got their sanitary tri-clamp seal on it. It's liquid tight, airtight. And as long as you've, taken the time to, if you're taking the time to sanitize everything, just go that next step further and flush everything with CO2 so there's no oxygen in there at all. Although with that one, we let it go a little bit longer, knowing that there is probably going to be some like gas oxygen might break out and get a little bit of oxygenation going on. But that was something we wanted to happen, because when you're barrel aging a beer, as the temperature, the ambient temperature of the room that the barrel's in your cellar room, there's going to be a little bit of like natural fluctuation of temperature, and the beer is going to kind of get absorbed into the wood and then pull back out. And that constant motion of it will slowly produce a small amount of oxidation over time, which can be desirable in certain levels. Kind of like in certain lagers, like there's a little bit of dimethyl sulfide DMS that gives it that kind of almost a little bit of a buttery flavor. In very small amounts can be desirable and too style for that beer, but most others it's frowned upon and isn't all flavor.
Right.
So you're just right. It's good, but I think that one turned out pretty well. Anymore, it might have been a little too much, but worked out.
So what is next for Neff Brewing?
Well, the next thing for us really is one, making some adjustments to our seasonal lineup and throwing in some new beers and trying to keep things fresh. But also we're trying our darndest to expand our footprint. We're really trying to cover, central US and expand our distribution. We're looking at, currently we're distributed in statewide in Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas, and we're trying to expand from there. And that's just kind of our MO for the next year or two. Would love to see our beer get into places that just don't have, the options, that don't have other local gluten-free breweries, because I know there's people who, really want to try this beer, but, maybe they're in Chicago or Nashville or wherever it may be, and they don't have those options, and they're, stuck with their seltzers and ciders and stuff and want to drink some good beer. And since we can't yet ship directly to consumers, our best option is just to keep expanding our distribution. We're trying to go really anywhere and everywhere that would take us, but I would really like to make sure we're covering those underrepresented areas, even if it's not a large volume, just making sure people have those options, because, I remember when there really weren't any. And that was just, when you're told, well, you can't drink beer anymore, you got celiac disease, you got to stick with seltzers and ciders. A lot of people just, their heart sinks.
That's pretty much the face.
Yeah. And so to be able to, have those options, it's important to me to, feel like everywhere is covered and included. I'd love to see more gluten-free breweries popping up. I know there's a few more planning, a few that just opened up. I was on a call with the Gluten-Free Brewers Association a few weeks ago or a month or two ago, and it was cool to see that there's some more coming up on the East Coast, like Lucky Pigeon out in Maine, I believe.
I think they're in Maine, I think.
Somewhere up there in the Northeast. And then Brewery Nix is a new one I've heard of.
That's in Michigan. I've had their beers.
Oh, okay. They're in Michigan. Cool.
And they're the first one in Michigan.
That's awesome.
Very good.
That's good. Good to know. I love seeing them, pop up, and it's fun. We're a real small, tight knit community, so the more the merrier, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Fun fact: Neff Brewing shares our grand opening anniversary date with Two Bays Brewing in Australia.
Oh, cool.
That was not planned at all. It was just I ran into the guy at, we were talking at one of the conferences we were at and realized that we both opened up on December 7th in 2018.
Oh, wow.
They're in Australia, so they were ahead of us, but same date.
Does it really count? Because I mean, their toilets go backwards. And I was talking with an Australian brewer, and I was like, so do you have to stir your wort the opposite direction to get that whirlpool, to get that hop cone at the bottom? Of course, we can't forget about the one thing that's always been gluten-free, distilled liquors.
Sure.
Theoretically. I'm not sure if I go for that completely. I don't know about you, but I've reacted to some distilled liquors.
Tequila and rum, those don't have anything to begin with. But blended whiskeys, bourbons, things like that, they'll tend to mix in grain alcohol back. And I just don't think they do as good of a job of making sure they don't have other things, parts of the, maybe it's remnants of the mash. I've toured some really cool distilleries out in Scotland before and seen what they're doing. I've never had trouble with single malt Scotch but Irish whiskey, I think, is the safest in my opinion. And if you're going to go whiskey route, just because to be called an Irish whiskey, it's got to be triple distilled. And, the gluten protein in theory, it can't make it over the distillation process. So if you do it 3 times, purely it's
right.
Unless they're mixing stuff back in, which there's some, I was actually just at the liquor store earlier today and saw that Jameson, I think they have a new IPA version of Jameson and a stout version of Jameson where they're using malts and stuff from other breweries and different things.
Are those ones where they barrel age in stout barrel?
Right. I think it's they take an unused fresh barrel, they age a beer in it, and then they take that and they use that to age the whiskey in.
Yeah.
So those I kind of steered clear of because I just feel like there's
going to be some contamination there.
So I don't know, but I also don't really want to take the risk.
Right.
So I tend to stick with that. I'm happy to sit down and sip on a single malt Scotch that's, aged, 10 or 12 years or whatever. But when they're like that, they've taken care in the product, not going to have any gluten contamination.
Jonathan, what is your next experimental development you would like to do?
Yeah. Well, right now even though I was kind of avoiding it a bit there for a little while, we've starting to jump on the hazy train, and we've got a new series coming out this summer that I'm really excited about. We just have been putting out a few pilot batches here and there, trying out some new recipes, trying out some new hops. I found some combinations that I'm really a fan of, just because I feel like they're really unique in their flavor profile, and still really soft and sweet on the palate. But wow, now that's a good pour.
Yeah, your
nice
raspberry more.
I love that nice tan head it gets on there.
Oh yeah, it's such a nice deep tan head too. I've been chasing that color for a while.
Yeah, that one's worked out.
God, that's a good beer. This does not taste like it is.
Maybe 10.5. I can't remember what it is.
Let's see, 10%.
10%.
It wouldn't be that hard to take this and turn it into this.
No.
I mean, that would be a sin.
I'm actually hoping there are some bills in the Oklahoma legislature right now. People are trying to get breweries to be able to also produce wine, cider, and distill all on site without having to get a different address and things like that. So if that works out, that'd be really cool. And I get to really get into some experimentation there, which would be some fun. But right now, our next experiment stuff coming out are some hazy IPAs that I'm really excited about. You know, they're nice and they're really soft and sweet, but they're not really that same. I want to say they're not juicy, but going for certain other flavors depending on which hops we're using. So this one we've got has a really nice, we're using a lot of Sabro in it. So it's got a really nice, like kind of coconut cream flavor to it.
Okay.
When you pair that with these other kind of citrusy flavors, it's just like berries and cream. It's kind of what comes through.
Okay.
Something you're like, wow, this tastes like pineapple juice. This is, inspired by it, but a little bit different. We're starting to try out some other hops and play around with what you can do with that. Got a cold IPA coming out soon.
Those are fun.
I'm excited about that one because it was something we've never done before. We were like, well, we like brewing lagers, so what if we try this new style that everyone's talking about? But what I really want to, whenever one day I finally have the time to really dedicate myself to more experiments, I want to actually work on the potential I think all of us as gluten-free brewers have, because we're using these new malts, is forget mimicking beer styles and saying this is like the best, Doppelbock, gluten-free.
Right.
Fine. I want to start creating styles and just being like, okay, taste this beer. This is, brewed with these malts to hit a specific SRM, and we want, this finishing gravity, and we're going to use these hops, and kind of start thumb our nose at the, BJCP and the Reinheitsgebot and just say, we're going to go make new beers that are, using these new malts. I've been really kind of elbowing the other local breweries here who aren't gluten-free to say hey, you guys should, order a couple 100 pounds of, this malt from Grouse, or just let us know and we'll order some for you, so that they can try and start utilizing these malts in conjunction with barley. Doesn't really benefit the free community, but it's the level of experimentation that really excites me, of just what new beers and flavors can you come up with?
Yeah.
So that idea of, so we use, millet, buckwheat, rice, and quinoa. We're doing people have done a good job of making IPAs and, a lager and a stout and some, sours and other styles, but can we invent something new?
Like a millet wine, or
right.
Instead of barley wine,
come out with something that really highlights the flavors that you can only find in those. I'm really excited about the idea of playing off the flavors you get out of buckwheat and the new malts that Grouse has been spitting out for us, and how those might lend themselves towards mixed fermentation beers, and coming out with something that's just something brand new, maybe a Brett beer that's heavily focused on using various buckwheat malts, and maybe we make it, a lighter beer, or maybe we go the other direction and say, well, let's try and, do something that's a bigger, heavier beer that's a mixed ferm, that's a little less, there's been a little less done in that field, I guess.
Right. Just for those who may not know, what is a mixed fermentation beer?
Yeah, so generally speaking, most all beers are going to be fermented on either ale yeast or lager yeast. And those are just two different species of a brewing yeast. And one likes cold temperatures with the lagers, and the other one likes warm temperatures with the ales. Produce a bit of a different flavor profile. But when you start mixing in other organisms other than just plain brewer's yeast to ferment the beer, so if they're eating that sugar and producing byproducts, which for beer, when you're using brewer's yeast, that's just, generally speaking, it's alcohol and CO2 that it produces. But if you use, say, lactobacillus, like we use in our kettle sour, that also produces lactic acid. So that produces that tart flavors in there. And if you're going to use, Brettanomyces, or, any number of other wild yeasts, or other, this brewer's term, any other bugs to ferment the beer, you can get totally different flavor profiles. You can take the exact same wort, the exact same beer you or liquid you produce that's going to become beer, ferment one on a brewer's yeast and ferment the other on Brettanomyces or something along those lines, then you can really get something different. And then you can also use combinations thereof. So you can start out and ferment on brewer's yeast, but you say, okay, once we get halfway through fermentation, we're going to run all this liquid off the yeast and put it into barrels and throw in some, whatever you want. What also really interests me is going out to, you can go to different gardens or different orchards, or for what I would do is actually my parents, like you were saying with the raspberries and going and picking them by your parents' place, my parents have blackberries that grow behind their house. And I would love to go harvest some yeast off, wild yeast off those blackberries, and go brew a beer and throw in some of those, either the blackberries themselves or just capture that yeast in some wort and see what flavors we can get out of that. When you're doing those, they're generally much longer project beers where you have to taste them along the way, and you got to be, have the fortitude to be able to say, like, even if this tastes bad at 3 months, I'm going to let it sit for 6 months and taste it again. And then if I need to, I'll let it sit for 9 months. And, sometimes you can get something when you're doing those mixed fermentation beers, which partway through fermentation, you just think, that's disgusting. I need to get rid of this. But if you let it sit there and let that bacteria do its work after the yeast had done all of its work, and it's kind of finishing up those byproducts that the yeast produced, then you can really make something that's just a real masterpiece. And maybe as an analogy, you think like for one of those mixed ferm beers, you look at someone doing a giant oil painting, and if they put down their base paint or whatever, and then a few designs, you look at it, you're like, I guess I can kind of see a picture. But over time, once they put on those layers and those finishing touches, it starts to really look like a masterpiece. And same with that beer in a barrel. You've got to let it sit there and do its work and check on it. And, and then sometimes you can do really cool things. Like there's a brewery here locally called American Solera that I really admire. And they do what's called the Solera Technique, which is they'll do things like mixed fermentation beers, but they'll have a stack of barrels. And they just, over time, they switch barrels. So the liquid that's in the top barrel gets transferred to the one below that, and that one gets below that, and they just kind of work their way down, cascading down until it gets down to that final barrel, and that's what they package from. And at each stage, different things to it. They can package it at different points. They can do some really cool blending of the beers. So you can do like, kind of play like you're a, Belgian Trappist brewer, and you can do some really cool stuff. You can't call it Trappist, but you can, do those fun things with the barrels and say, okay, I'm going to brew fresh beer. And I'm going to mix that fresh beer with beer that's been aging and souring in this giant tank for the last 2 years. And I'm also going to add in, 50 gallons of this beer that's been aging for 6 months, and then create this masterpiece of a beer and package it and send it out. And then those are the fun ones to kind of sit on and, put in your back of your kitchen cabinet or whatever, and come back to it in a year after you drink one and see how they changed.
So that's kind of going into like beer de garde. You're talking like years and barrels and very slow aging processes.
Yeah. That to me is a really neat avenue. It's just requires time and money, and I could use
a lot of patience.
A lot of patience. And that's something I really lack right now.
Me too.
Because I taste the beer, I'm like, yeah, I want to package it now. I want to drink a carbonated glass.
You mentioned distilling. If you could produce a distilled product, what would you do?
I think I would probably try to have some fun with some single malt distillation, and I'd love to do like get the 2 barrels that are, from the same place, in theory, going to give the same flavors, and then distill something that's like pure millet, and take another one that's distilled in pure buckwheat, and another that maybe we mix the 2 malts. So it's not a single malt, but a double malt. Like that. And then just see what we can come up with, see what we can get out of that, and play with that. Then, in an ideal world in the future, the really fun part would be to take, make some house whiskeys, or I don't even know what you would call it if it's that same process but made with these other grains. No one's ever really done anything like that. What would those be? But then also taking the barrels from those after aging something for a few years in it, and then using those barrels to then age some beers with. And then you could have, really fun, like a buckwheat whiskey, single malt buckwheat whiskey, and then you have the imperial stout that was aged in that barrel. And that'd be just so much fun to do stuff like that. It'd be fun to do like some blue corn bourbons, fill out the 49% with, some nice millet malt or a buckwheat malt or something like that.
Right.
That'd be fun. I actually, fun fact also, before I ever got into home brewing, because the first thing I was diagnosed with celiac disease right before I moved abroad and lived in Spain for several years. And so while I was in Spain, I learned that, distilled liquors, generally speaking, are gluten-free. So my first, love of alcohol was single malt Scotch. And
Okay.
I wanted to start a distillery and wanted to do that. I was like, it's gluten-free, it'll be awesome. Then I was looking at it, I was like, man, like you gotta brew and then wait 10 years. Screw that. So then I found home brewing and beer, and that worked out better.
Right. So why did you go with a space theme for Neff Brewing?
Well, it's kind of a fun story. It all starts because I've got a friend of mine that I met while I was living in Spain, who's our graphic designer. He designed that rocket logo for us. And when we were talking about the brewery and what we wanted to do with it and what kind of branding we wanted, who we wanted to be, I had all these different ideas, but I couldn't settle on any one thing. And so I told him, I said, you know what, like, I honestly, I can't decide right now. So just draw something that you really like to do, that you're passionate about, have fun with it, and maybe make it something that could be turned into a tap handle one day or something like that. And he came back with the Neff rocket with the, hot flame on the back of it. And then we got to talking about it, came to realize that we were both big Star Trek fans. And we just
yes, Star Trek.
And Next Generation, Voyager, and Deep Space Nine.
TNG.
TNG is the best.
Okay, so DS9, that's like, we could do like 15 episodes of this just on fucking DS9. But continue.
I love all of those. But also, fun fact, every single one of our fermenters at the brewery is named after a different Star Trek captain or character, and they've got a picture of them like on the side of the tank rather than.
Okay, so you have Spock.
So currently we have the original four were Kirk, Cisco, Janeway, and Picard. We then added on 3 more tanks, and we have LaForge, Troy, and Worf. We've got 2 serving tanks that are O'Brien and Quark.
Okay.
And the next tanks coming in are going to be Spock. And we've got room for about 6 more tanks. So we've got several more characters we're going to go through and name.
You have to have, oh shit, what's her name? Oh god, she died like in the first half of season 1.
Lieutenant Yar.
Yeah, Lieutenant Yar.
Yeah.
She died to the oil monster or some shit.
We still need one for Data too, and all those. But anyway,
Data.
That's kind of where this kind of stems from. But we really like the idea of how space kind of ties into the idea of brewed for everyone, because it really is in a way like an equalizer. Like with the International Space Station, it doesn't matter, where you come from, what your background is, what type of person you are. You're up there and you're working together for the betterment of humanity, and also so that everyone can survive,
Right.
You're all equal. They've got their captain or whatever, but everyone up there is working together. And, I don't know if you saw in the news, I don't know if it was a few weeks ago or a month ago or more, but with the conflict with Russia and Ukraine and stuff going on, the Russian cosmonauts brought home one of the American astronauts. And it was just like, okay, they're able to settle their differences and do what's necessary. And I respect that. But also just, with Star Trek, the idea of how in Star Trek, they've moved past all of these inherent biases that, people tend to have, and, everyone's equal in the way they treat each other. And it's like, to me, that's an idyllic version of what humanity could achieve. And I like the idea of working towards that. So for me, Brewed for Everyone and our space theme kind of all ties into that of, let's all work together. We're all about, equality, diversity, and exploration. That's basically a 3-word mission statement for Neff Brewing, which is, we want everyone together, equal. We want everyone, exploring together, seeing what beer can mean for a community and what beer can be, what can it be made of, and who else can we include in this? So
to go where no beer has gone before.
That's pretty good.
As a home brewer, what 3 pieces of home brewing equipment upped your game the most?
I would say probably first and foremost was a way to control fermentation temperature rather than just, putting it away in a closet somewhere. And the way I did that was get one of those, I think it's like an Inkwell Thermobird temperature monitor thing. I can't remember the name of it, but
Inkwell Thermobird. Google it. You'll find it.
You just, I found a giant chest freezer at a garage sale, and they were like, they thought it was broken, and they sold it to me for $50, and it was just a loose wire, and I went back there and fixed the wiring on
Oh,
it.
nice.
But then I plugged in one of those temperature controllers, and I just, on each one of my, carboys or brewing buckets, I just kind of put this styrofoam insulation thing and duct taped it to it with a little hole in it to stick the probe up against the, side of whatever vessel it was in, and was able to start controlling my fermentation temperatures a little better, and, keeping them under that, 72-degree mark so you don't get it too many off flavors in your beers. And that really helped a lot. Getting what are, quote, precision hydrometers. You can get a set of 3 online at most homebrew, shops online, and they'll have like one for high gravity beers, one for in the center, and one for your finishing gravity. So that finishing gravity one, that really only goes from, I think it's, 1.020 all the way down to 000, like, below water or whatever. But having that fine tuning at the end to really tell where it was and what it was and when to crash the beer helped a lot. And I think just an overall, if you're bottling your home brews and you're not kegging them, I think it's really crucial to cold crash your beer. The best way I found to do that was just take a few drawers out of the refrigerator and just lift your bucket up in there, let it sit for 2 days, and then package straight from there. And those things really, I felt like, upped my game quite a bit. If you want to get into, the deeper science side of it, I feel like it doesn't make the difference to the average drinker, but to a trained palate, adjusting your water chemistry will help a lot. So, knowing what your, what salts and what the mineral profile of your water is, whether you've got hard water or soft water. Most of the time you can get reports from your, local city, municipality, or whatever.
Right.
I just use Ward Laboratories because it's like $40 or something like that. You send off a sample and they tell you exactly what you need to know about your water for brewing. And then you just plug that into whatever program you use, whether that be online with Brewer's Friend, or I like to use Beersmith, and plugging that in to really kind of know what you got there. So when you're trying to make those really light beers, like a really good crisp Pilsner or something like that, it helps a lot to have that water chemistry down. And that's how you kind of turn a really good beer into a great beer, in my opinion.
Is there a specific water chemistry thing, or one of the water salts you have found that really helped, like that is just crucial to, especially like body and head retention?
You know, I would say more than anything, especially with the gluten-free brewing, less with the body and head retention, but like mash efficiencies can be kind of low. Making sure you have enough calcium in your mash, other nutrients for your yeast later on are important, but making sure you got that calcium, it helps with the enzymes. It'll help with your conversion. Most water is going to be okay, but if you've got a really, really soft water and there's not much in there, you really need to add some more to it. That's important. And then it just depends. Are you trying to make, a double IPA and you're just cramming it with a ton of hops and spending a lot of money? Well, you can up the sulfate content of your water a little bit, add in some gypsum salt, and that will, or Epsom salt will work too, either one. And that'll help you get a more perceived bitterness on the beer with adding less hops to it, which can avoid some other off flavors. Or if you're going to go the other direction and make a really, nice malty imperial stout or something like that, but just having a little bit of trouble balancing those flavors, making sure you have some extra chloride content in there. So whether or not you're just adding in sodium chloride, your table salt, or calcium chloride, whatever it may be, adding in a little bit of that will help. But I would say I would want to know what you're adding into it and what you're doing. I would say either know what you're adding and add it, or don't add anything at all. Kind of going in the middle, you're going to end up with something that's either way too malty or way too hoppy. It can be kind of acrid if you're really stringent. I mean to say, if you add in too much of a sulfate content and really get off there. But there's quite a bit of literature out there. If people want to do some digging, I feel like that's how you turn a good beer into a great beer. But you can make really good beer and just forget the water. It still is going to turn out fine.
Usually I say if you start with spring water, it'll be a good beer.
Yeah.
All right. Any last thoughts?
I guess it's going towards the home brew crowd. I would say, don't be afraid, to make bad beer. Like, you got to go through a lot of bad beer to get to the good beer. And, mistakes happen. And my very first beer was a Russian Imperial Stout. I brewed, and it was actually a barley beer. I was just specifically brewing it to try out, can I figure out how to brew? Because this is a lot cheaper than brewing with these gluten-free grains. And I blew the top off my fermenter and beer went everywhere. It was a nightmare. I was on the phone with the home brew store. What do I do? Oh my God. And it's just, beer's pretty resilient for the most part. And, just don't be afraid to make something. And if it's no good, try again. Because that's how you get to the really good stuff.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'd like to thank you for coming on. And you want to share your website and socials?
You can find us. Our social media handles are just at Neff Brewing, NEFF. And our website is just neffbrewing.com. And, if you want to come and check out the tap room, we're, wherever you are, if you can visit Tulsa, Oklahoma, we're in downtown Tulsa. And we've got a nice, big tap room and hold events all the time. I think currently we have 22 different beers on tap. And we have 28 taps. So we have at one point 28 beers on tap, but generally it's about 20 beers, give or take. So
I get all of those in one flight. Cheers. Thanks for coming on.
Cheers.
As always, I'd like to thank my sponsor, Groundbreaker Brewing. A big shout out to all of my fans, to Jonathan for taking the time to sit down with me. If you like this content, if you have suggestions, drop down in the comments. Tell me what you like, tell me what you don't like. Smash that like button, subscribe, and follow me on Facebook and Instagram. You can shop at my store, gfbsupply.com, for all your unique gluten-free malt needs.